Boatworks Today is sponsored by Total Boat and Alexseal Yacht Coatings, as well as supported by the generosity from the beautiful folks over on Patreon. Thank you so much.
So welcome back to Shop, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. My name is Andy with Boatworks Today. Now, this week is going to be a continuation from the last video where I fabricated a fiberglass cover for the gas regulator on our house generator. Now, in that video, I made a form. I was able to cast the two halves of this cover, and luckily I was able to say that it actually fit, because I wasn't so sure it was going to, but it did. So for this video then, we're going to go ahead, we're going to dress it up, finish it off, and install it for the season. So last week we had our first snow flurries, and while it didn't stick around hardly at all, it doesn't really matter. It lights a fire under your shorts because now that door to the winter season has officially opened. So at this point, we could get hit with our first storm literally at any time. I mean, we've had some winters where on Halloween we've had over 3 feet of snow, and yet other years we got our first dusting like right before Christmas. Now, granted, that's not typical. Usually it lands somewhere in the middle, closer to like Thanksgiving, but point being, you never really know. And as far as getting outdoor stuff, wrapped up, if it's not done before winter sets in, it's not gonna get done. And that, it kind of lights a little fire under your shorts, makes things a little bit spicy. So, it's better to be safe than sorry. With that said, choppy, let's get this thing knocked out.
Now, for tinting my gel coat, I'm going to be using some pigments that are specifically designed to be used with polyester and epoxy products. And as you can see here, there are a number of different colors that you can choose from, but generally speaking, the three main ones that you're going to want to be using, especially if you're trying to match like a white, off-white, more of like a cream type color, are going to be your black, brown, and your yellow. Now, as far as the color that I'm going to try and match here, I have no idea how well or how bad this is going to end up. But I'm trying to match the color of the generator cover itself. And obviously I don't have it up here with me to do like a side-by-side comparison, so I took a little bit of a mental picture, and I'm going to give it my best on what I think it's going to be. It could be close, it could be way off, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. If it's close, awesome. If it's way off, well, there isn't much I'm going to do about it at this point. If you would like to see a step-by-step tutorial on how to do the color matching when you're working with Gelcoat, I will include a link to a playlist down below in the description. Now, this is an oldie but a goodie. The information is still relevant. The only thing that's different, from then compared to now is that, well, I was a lot younger back then. But the information is still solid. Nothing about the process has changed. But again, I will have a link to those videos down below in the description. So I'm getting ready to start spraying the gel coat. Now, before I get into that, I guess, frame of mind, there's a couple details that I wanted to go over. The first is the type of gun and the reducers that I'm going to be using here. Now, the type of gun that I'm using, it's nothing special. I've had this thing, I don't know, 20 plus years. It's not an expensive gun, and actually I would suggest that if you're going to be spraying gel coat, if you have a dedicated gun for it, don't bother getting an expensive one because it's not worth it. Anytime you use this with gel coat or anything that catalyzes and hardens fairly quickly, there's a 50-50 chance every time you use it that you may end up trashing the gun. So something from Harbor Freight, Home Depot, again, nothing fancy, nothing special. Now the tip on this is a 1.4 millimeter, which for spraying gel coat is a little on the small side. I would say something around 2.5 millimeter would be much more adequate. But at the end of the day, I mean, if you thin the material down enough, as long as it flows through here, it'll spray just fine. Now, gel coat, unlike paint, whenever you spray it, it's not a matter of you spray it and it's perfectly finished. I mean, every single time you spray gel coat, there is going to be wet sanding and there's going to be buffing involved 100% of the time. So, I mean, any kind of idea that you might have about being able to spray it and just call it done, I mean, if you don't really care how it looks, yeah, you could get away with that. But I mean, if you want it to look nice, it's not going to happen right off the gun. Now, I touched on the reducer. Now, essentially, there's two different types of reducer. You have reactive and then non-reactive. So, for example, a non-reactive reducer is something that it just evaporates out of whatever material it is you're spraying. That could be acetone, it could be styrene, it could be a number of things. But it evaporates out, so it's just essentially a carrier for the material that you're spraying just to thin it down and go through the gun. Now, the other type of reducer is a reactive thinner. Now, some examples of this would be like Patch Aid or Duratec, their high gloss additive. Now, these are reducers that they don't evaporate, they become part of the mixture and they actually harden with the material that you're spraying. So for these Patch Aids, these Duratecs, if you were to just catalyze that on its own, it would cure to a solid state. So there's some advantages and disadvantages to those. So for example, when you're using these reactive thinners, they are typically cut with the material roughly 1-to-1, or 100%. So you'd have 2 ounces of gel coat, 2 ounces of this Duratec high gloss additive, or the Patch Aid. Now, what that does is that greatly reduces the viscosity of the material that you're spraying, which, as far as spraying is concerned, is wonderful. However, what you're doing is you're cutting the pigment level. I guess I'm referring to gel coat specifically, but you're cutting the pigment level or concentration by half. And what that means at the end of the day is when you're spraying, in a given thickness, you've got to apply more coats. You have to have a thicker film in order to get full hide, because you've displaced that pigment. It becomes somewhat translucent, which is why I'm not really a fan of it. Just as an example, if you had a 1/16 of an inch thickness of just solid gel coat, you're going to have full hide. If you have a 1/16 inch of thickness of the gel coat that's been cut with one of these reactive reducers, you're still going to be able to see through it. So you're going to have to apply 2, 3, 4 more coats to get that hide that you're looking for. So for that reason, not really a fan of it. I don't want to have to do any more work than I have to. One other important thing is when you're using these reactive reducers, the ones that harden as part of the material, they are not to be used below the waterline. Ever. I mean, if you take them, if you use something like that below the waterline, say on your hull, you take it out, spend an afternoon fishing, come back, most likely it's already going to be starting to blister. So it's not intended for that kind of purpose. Above the waterline, it's perfectly safe, it's perfectly fine, and I could probably get away with it, spraying these parts without any issue, but I don't have any, and I didn't want to buy it. Why? So for reducing this, I'm going to be using the standard base reducer that's used in all polyester products, which is good old-fashioned styrene, right? As far as how much reducer I'm going to be using, I don't know if it's going to be 10, 20, 30%, give or take, until it gets to the viscosity where it'll flow through this gun without any issue.
I don't want it sitting there spitting and sputtering, or sputtering. So, you know what I mean. I still want a fairly decent atomization of the material coming out of the gun. Although, you know, again, like I mentioned, knowing it's not going to be perfect, but as close to that as we can get, the better, because it'll just mean that much less wet sanding and buffing on the back end. So with that said, I'm going to mask up, get everything kind of prepped, open these doors, turn on my air scrubbers here, and we're going to do a little bit of playing around. All right, so that actually sprayed out quite nice. The viscosity was pretty much perfect. I did just do one coat for right now. I'm gonna let this sit and flash off for probably 20-ish minutes, give or take. And what that's gonna do is the surface, it's still gonna be tacky, but it's not gonna be runny. And what that's gonna allow me to do on the second coat is, because I'm spraying on a tacky surface, I'm gonna be able to lay it on a little bit heavier and not have to worry about sags. Now, speaking about sags, I didn't get any on here, at least not yet. But there are definitely some cosmetic defects that I just missed. You know, when you're doing the fairing process, you're looking at a bunch of different colors. Sometimes you can't always see or even feel some of these defects. And for what this is, I don't really care. No one's going to see it, to be perfectly honest. So if the OCD in me kind of takes over, I can always come back after the spraying is done, and then I can come in with some unthickened gel coat and just kind of dab in any of these low areas. And that's essentially what we're talking about. Let me see if I can zoom in and show you. So at least on the smaller one, it's little things like this. I mean, you can see there's a little dimple there. There's kind of a line where it's low. I knew these ends were going to be kind of jacked up because, well, I didn't want to spend the time sanding them. But at least on this one, that seems to be kind of the biggest thing. And it's a similar situation over on the other section. Zoom in. And again, I don't know if this is all going to get picked up on camera. I should probably change the way that this is focusing. There, focus on that. Okay. And similar kind of deal here, you know, and again, it's just a groove from when I was sanding. The sanding disc just kind of cut a little bit in on that corner. There's some other little ones, little dimples here. And again, it's not perfect, but I'm not shooting for perfect on this. You know, this is just one of my own personal projects. It needs to be more utilitarian than anything. And, you know, I got some little pinholes here, but again, nothing major. It's not going to affect the what this is going to be doing for the generator over the winter. So like I said, I'm going to give this about 15-20-ish minutes. And again, if I wanted, I could wait until tomorrow. This is non-waxed laminating gel coat. So if I wanted to, I could just check out for the night, come back tomorrow and spray the second coat. But I want to get this done tonight so that it can have a nice long cure overnight. So again, 15-20 minutes, I'm gonna let the styrene evaporate off. When it starts to look kind of dull, then I know that styrene has evaporated. I'm gonna mix up another coat, and then we're essentially gonna do a rinse and repeat. And that's probably gonna be my last coat. I got pretty good height on here, so now I'm just looking for some build. So when I actually do some wet sanding, I don't accidentally sand through. At least that's the plan. All right, so far, I think this looks really good. Hopefully you can still hear me. The fan's obviously still running, but I'm gonna go ahead and break down the gun, clean all the parts so that it doesn't seize up on me, and then I will be back in the morning. Now, I know I said I wasn't gonna be screwing around with this too much. I can't help myself. I didn't go into this expecting it to be perfect, and that certainly wasn't the goal, but there are a couple of very glaring little things here that would be super easy just to take care of. And it'll be a lot easier to do it now than to try and come back to it at a later date and address it. So I'm not gonna go crazy, but some of the major low spots, little blemishes, that kind of thing, I am gonna touch up. Hopefully this all sets up so that I can come in and do the cut and buff on it yet today, because today is the crunch day. So. And this is one of the beauties of using gel coat, specifically like a laminating type gel coat, because you know this stuff is set up, but yet I can come in the following day and just dab in any little touch-ups without having to do any additional prep. So I spared you all the wet sanding just because that would have been boring AF. So kind of fast forward a little bit here. But I think this is about as far as I'm gonna take the sanding. Now I brought it up, I went from 400 to 600 and then I ended up at 800. And I think this is where I'm gonna stop. At this point, I've got one of two options. Either one, I can go up one more grit and then I could polish it out and try and get that gloss. I have a few concerns about trying that. For one, these pieces are small. And when I'm sitting here trying to buff this thing out with a large, I don't know what it is, a 10 or 12 inch diameter buffing pad that's spinning around at 400, 500, 600 RPM, one or two things is likely to happen. Either one, the buffer is going to catch an edge on here and it's going to take my shoulders for a ride, which that would be no good. The other possibility is that it catches an edge on here and then this thing goes flying maybe through a window or TV or whatever. Either way, either scenario is not good. Now, that's the main thing. But also, I don't know that I really want to buff this thing out, because if you buff that out, that brings up the gloss. And whenever you're dealing with a surface that has a high gloss, any imperfections that are on here, and there are plenty of surface imperfections on here, those just like jump right out at you and slap you across the face. They become so obvious. So the generator cover, which I'm hoping this is going to be somewhat of a close match, that's a satin finish. So I think I'm going to leave this as a satin finish as well. Helps to hide the sins, and well, it saves a few extra steps. Now, the wet sanding, overall for what it is, I think went fairly well. There was, I did burn through a little spot like right here, but it's not a big deal. I'll put that towards the right against the house so nobody can see it. This side looks okay, right? And as far as the other one, similar kind of deal there. Let's see. Actually, the sanding went a little bit better. There's a few more imperfections, but I got one little tiny ass little burn through right. I don't know if you're even gonna see that, but anyways, that little bit. And then, overall, it looks pretty decent from, this is like the 10-foot rule. If it looks good from 10 feet, then we're good. And I think this is gonna pass that. So I'm gonna let these dry off a little bit, and then I gotta start finishing off the interior.
So by the time I finished up last night, it wasn't like pitch black, but it was dark. So I wasn't able to get any kind of a sense as far as how close or how far off I was on the color match. But I was able to do just kind of a real crude test fit to make sure that those gaskets that I put in there didn't kind of undersize it too much, and it wasn't going to be able to clamp tight over the regulator. Well, the fit is about as good as I could have hoped for. And surprisingly, the color, although it's not perfect, it's certainly close enough. It's a few shades off. And for basically tinting it from memory, I'm actually very, very happy with how this looks. It certainly passes the 10-foot rule. Now, going forward, there's a couple of things I'd like to give a little bit more thought to. The main one being how the tops and bottoms of this cover are going to be secured with each other. Right now, it's just 4 bolts, and although it works, it is a little bit fiddly. Here, it's fine, but if for whatever reason I gotta take this thing apart in the middle of winter when it's cold and 2-3 feet of snow out there, that might suck just a little bit. Originally, I was thinking I was gonna do some kind of a hinge on the back so it could kind of close over top of it like a clamshell. And then, maybe like a little snap latch. But the more I was looking at it, if I had that hinged, I don't know that I'd be able to sneak it back behind the regulator housing and actually get it into position to close it. So that's why I kind of abandoned that idea. I also thought about doing something with like Velcro. I wasn't sure how secure I felt about that one. Or I also kind of catered the idea of using some strong magnets. But there again, I didn't know if that was going to create some havoc with some kind of metal parts within the regulator or not. So I bailed on that one. And I just stuck with what I knew was going to be tried and true and work guaranteed. But it is still a little bit fiddly. So overall, I think this is going to work out really, really well. And I think it looks pretty good. Although there is one small detail that I think might kind of jazz it up a little bit. Yeah, that's better.
And with that, one more thing crossed off the list, and I think this is going to be a good stopping point for this video. So as always, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found it helpful. And if you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Thank you in advance. Much appreciated. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to leave those down below. I will do my best to follow up with you. And as always, I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful weekend and a safe Halloween. And I'll see you in the next video.
This has been a Boatworks Today production.